Go. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our May meetup. I can't believe May is almost over. Today we are going to start with a customer spotlight, which is with Toni Aswegan. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Oswegan.
Yeah,
It's a tricky
Aswegan.
one.
Yeah. Toni is a PracticeVital customer and the owner of Riverbank Therapy, which is in Seattle. I'm doing this kind of off the top of my head.
Yes.
And you have about 30 employees.
Hmm.
Okay, awesome. And Toni is just going to kind of share her story with us today, a little bit about her relationship with data, her ways she uses Practice Vital for her own practice. And then we're going to get to ask her some questions, and then we'll have open Q&A towards the end. So if there's anything you've been thinking about in terms of Practice Vital, how to use it, um, anything else question you have, just take a second and like write that down for yourself so that you remember to ask us and just decide whether it's more of a Tony question or more of a us question because we'll have time for both.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna hand it over to Toni to share a little bit about just kind of her story in terms of your transformation with data to start with.
Yes. Yeah. I think we said in the little like blurb that went out before this of how I really used to suck at data, which is super true, and now I feel like I'm getting good at it, which is fun. So as a like classic therapist married to an engineer, I like feelings more than numbers. And my engineer husband is always like, "How about numbers though? The data matters." And I'm like, "I don't like it. It's not real. It's not people." And he's like, "That's dumb." Anyway, he's right. So I basically started my practice with really sort of like loose expectations of my employees on how many sessions they would complete. That I gave a range, and it was a range of openings and not of actually completed sessions. And so for years, we kind of operated like that, where clinicians were in the range of available sessions, but their actually completed sessions were much lower than that. And I didn't even really know that it was much lower than that because I wasn't tracking it at all. And so I think we were maybe a little bit lucky in the way that I set up the compensation model and the finances of my business that like we were still profitable and it was okay. But it wasn't really working in multiple ways. One for like the business finances, like it was working, but barely. And then for my employees, we also found that there were like really unclear expectations. I had an employee who was like, but I'm giving this availability, and they were like on the low end of the availability. I'd ask them for 20 to 25 and they would like only do 20. And I was like, yeah, but you actually should be doing 25. And then realized like, oh, okay, this is because I'm communicating this range. I need to be clear and communicate on number that we're expecting 25 openings. And then for years, we kind of operated like that, where we said 25 openings, it'll work itself out. You'll see enough clients, have enough completed sessions, and like still was not tracking completed sessions. And like still we were like profitable enough and it was like kind of okay, but there was still not clarity from the clinicians or for the clinicians. And so a couple of years ago, I decided to really start working with Practice Vital and start tracking this data just for information. I wasn't even going to change expectations on my team, but really to just figure out how many sessions are my clinicians actually doing? Because I didn't know. Which, like, from a business standpoint of like knowing your numbers, like that's the most important number, other than your like revenue per session, is how many sessions are happening. So you can't make any real decisions about what's happening if you don't know at minimum those two numbers, right? How many sessions are happening and how much are we getting paid for them? So I started using Practice Vital mainly just to track that, the sessions total, but also sessions per clinician, and really began to notice how few actually completed sessions my clinicians were doing. That I had people averaging, who are full-time averaging like 15 sessions a week. When I'm saying we need 25 available hours, assuming that would get them to 20 sessions per week completed. That was my assumption, but never
Mm.
stated it directly to my team. And then I have people doing 16, and I don't have anything to tell them this isn't acceptable because they're doing the requirement of 25 available hours per week. So sort of my entry into really using the data was just using it to gather information and figure out, okay, what are my expectations, spoken or unspoken, to my team, and where is my team meeting or not meeting those expectations, and what do I need to shift in my practice, policy wise, expectation, communication, to make sure we're getting what we need as a practice. And in that phase, started to introduce data to my team, not as and I kind of explained it of like, we're just using this for information right now, and just started sending them their numbers. And I think this was before PracticeVital let them have access, so we would email them the reports every week. And basically just framed it as, we just want you to know. Just FYI, here's some numbers. And that was kind of like getting my team's feet wet on data because I think this is not uncommon amongst therapists to have sort of an aversion to data. I think especially culturally in Seattle, there's a real aversion to it just because of the way Seattle specifically tends to be. Um, and so I was really just trying to get my team used to the idea that the data existed, that they were looking at it, knowing that we were looking at it. So we spent a fair amount of time just kind of having it exist and be communicated monthly. Um,
Toni, how
and
did
I,
you, not to just to jump in here, how
yeah.
did you kind of deal with that resistance? Because, we talk about that with people every day. Like how, or was there resistance, or was it more mental resistance on your, or like you would anticipated there being an issue with it and then there wasn't? I don't know.
Yeah, so it was, we had, I think, different types of resistance. So some folks had a sort of, I don't quite know what to call it, but a principled resistance to data of like, I don't want to be tracked. Therapy is intangible and the numbers don't matter. And this is about people. So they had that sort of like principle, just like data is not useful in this human-centered field. And for those people, I would have the conversation of like, yes, and this is a business and we need numbers to figure out how to make everything work. And really like understand what's happening for you. To those clinicians, I also talked to them about, and this came maybe a little directly a little bit more later when I updated our policies around billable hours per week, where I would say like, look, when you got hired, I sent you a compensation outline that assumed you would be seeing this many clients per week, and you're not. So like you're actually not getting paid what you expected to be getting paid when you started because I haven't actually clearly communicated the expectation, and you have the same expectation that you're getting paid this much and you're not. And this is like actually because you're not seeing enough clients.
And then
Um,
they often ask for a raise, and you realize that they're asking for the raise that would get them to the normal, that the amount that they just needed or part of their contractual obligation anyway.
exactly. Yeah. And so when I had folks sort of with that type of resistance, I would say like actually like us knowing this data is going to help you get paid what you need to get paid. And also we'll give the practice more information of like when we can give raises and like, oh, look, if everybody actually sees a few more clients, maybe we can add more PTO later on. Like actually revenue creates ability for benefits. So I had some people with that sort of resistance, and then some people with the more like I'd call it like anxiety-based resistance of I'm failing, I'm not doing a good job. They're sort of over-interpreting the data or under-interpreting it in a way of like, here's my retention rate for the last month is 50%, but I only had two new clients and one of them left early. And like, okay, that's actually not enough of a story for this data to mean anything. But I would have clinicians who sort of didn't know how to interpret their own data, where they would attach a story to it and then get really anxious about that story, even though that wasn't the story I was telling. And so with those clinicians and in general, with how we communicate data now, we communicate it as like numbers are just numbers and they actually don't mean anything to me until I have a story about them. And I can maybe give an example a little bit later on about one of our employees. We've had to parse his data for story to figure out what's actually happening. Um, but we really try to explain that to people of like, we're not just going to like blanket say like, you're at 19 and you should be at 20 and you're failing. It's like, okay, you're at 19, but you've had these three openings on your caseload for the last 3 months because you really want more couples and we're holding the openings for couples. Like, and we've talked about that being okay. So this 19 number is totally fine for me because we've talked about it already. And so really I try to manage that sort of resistance to the data by being really clear to my team that I want the story about it.
That's cool. Yeah. And one thing that just came to mind around that specific example is you could even set a different goal period for that period of
Mhm.
time that was 19 sessions completed. And so you're actually even reflecting in the data that change just so
Yeah,
that they can still feel like they're being successful because that was the understanding.
exactly. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Oh, I love the goal periods. They're so useful. Had some clinicians recently who are taking leave for various reasons, and to be able to like set it to zero, or like when we've had interns who then graduate and then get hired and they don't see clients for like 3 months in the in between,
Yeah.
and like their data just would look like trash when they started, and I'm like, oh, this is because you had like 3 months of zero, and
Yeah.
the goal periods really help us like set that and have it be clear for them that they actually
Awesome.
are meeting expectations, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So share with us a little bit about how you have implemented it now. Like, what are you doing with the data on a
Yes.
regular basis?
Yeah, so we have now clarified to our team the billable hours expectations of 20 per week, which I need to update probably to 21 because we do include sick time and PTO as client sessions in our particular data. And we also, for our supervisors, include supervision as a client session because they have a lower client load based on supervisees. And so we include that data because we don't want people to feel stressed about taking time off. But really, it amounts to like an hour a week over the course of a year. So I really should update us to 21 to actually be getting people to 20. But anyway, so what we do now is we have goal periods for everybody. So when somebody joins the team, we set 3 months of onboarding goal periods, where we anticipate that their caseload is going to be lower as they're building up. So we do, I think the first month is 5, the second month is 10, the third month is 15, and then by the fourth month they should be hitting the 20. So we set those goal periods when they start, to be able to track their onboarding progress. And we tell our team like retention numbers are not going to mean a whole lot until you're about 6 months in, just because of like the like new client churn, and just like the pace of new clients is really hard. So we talk to them about like we don't look at retention a lot until a little bit later on. We haven't implemented yet, but we are like next week, Tori, we're going to add the conversion for consults. Because right now we don't have individual clinicians' data on converting consults to intakes. We have practice-wide data about it, but not for individual clinicians, which we want. So we are going to be implementing that, and that's going to be sort of our feedback mechanism for new hires to say, like, look, you're converting 90% of your consults to intakes. That's great. That tells us we're sending you the right fit clients, and
Mm.
that you were doing a good job of like communicating to them that you're a good fit and getting them scheduled. Versus we've had, and this is maybe the example I'll talk about a little bit later, some employees where we, without the conversion report, have kind of backed our way into knowing that their conversion is low. But now that we'll have the conversion report, it'll be really easy to be able to tell that information. So we do that for onboarding for new hires, and we just sort of get them used to the system. And then once people are established, we get them logged into their PracticeVital so they can check their data anytime. But we do a monthly report to our team. So my clinical director, she goes into PracticeVital and pulls out our average hourly sessions for the quarter, their churn for the quarter, their cancellation rate, and their retention rate. So those main four numbers, she sends them, and we do it based on the past quarter. And then she will adjust it if it's, somebody where we know, they were onboarding or something has happened in their life where that we've been holding openings or whatever. She'll like adjust it and say like, okay, so the past quarter you were at 15, but the past year you were at 22. So she sort of like interprets it to know like, oh, this number might cause this person some anxiety. So we're going to maybe soothe that a little bit by seeing if the number is better if we do a longer time period, and talk about it if we need to. And then we note in that email, this is just for information, log into PracticeVital if you want to toggle dates or check this out more or look more specifically into things. And then we do a monthly meeting with all of our team where we review their data with them. And usually this takes, in uncomplicated cases, like 2 minutes. Like, hey, let's look at PracticeVital together. We pull it up together and we look at it. We say, this is your average, your churn retention looks good. If it all looks good, that's the end of the conversation. Like, keep doing what you're doing. If there's a number that looks confusing, we will talk about it. So I did this yesterday with one of my staff that I supervise. Their retention rate for the quarter was 50%. And they're like a clinician who has typically a very high retention rate. And so I was like, this seems weird. What's going on? And again, this is where I talk about like we always want to attach a story to data where that clinician, I know that that's a weird number. And so I'm not going to be like, you're failing or doing a bad job. I'm like, no, this confuses me. Like, I'm always going to get curious about it before I make any sort of judgment call or decision about it. And so I looked at it with them and we said, okay, you've had 4 new clients in the last quarter and 2 of them aren't retained. One of them ended early because their insurance canceled, and the other one is in between. They're still being seen. They just haven't, the way their sessions have progressed, they just haven't done 8 yet in this quarter. It's like, actually, this is totally fine. So this number is okay. We're good with this. And if we expand it to the last 12 months, your retention rate is 80%. So like, good. Um,
Yeah.
so in those meetings, we will look at those numbers to make sure, like, if it's in the red or yellow, is this actually a problem? Or is there a story we can attach that makes this make sense that we're okay with? Versus, oh no, maybe this is actually a problem, right? Your
Yeah,
retention
and
rate
I would
is
even use
50%.
that as a coaching opportunity, Tony.
Mhm.
Like with, if I see that there's a lot of clients that are in between, which means basically they haven't been retained yet, but it's been enough time according to the way your setup is for
Yeah.
them to be retained. It means they're not coming very frequently. So if they're still on the schedule, but the status says between in the client's data sheet, that's what we're talking about. So I
Mhm.
sometimes say, one thing that makes clients more likely to be retained is frequent sessions. And
Yeah.
so if we see, and I'm finding this in the data, that when people start on an infrequent basis, which is what we're
Mhm.
tracking, these are new clients. And if they're coming every other week from the start, it's more likely we're going to lose them, that they will never make it to that 8 session mark. So I think that's even just a coaching opportunity to just say, like,
Mhm.
hey, here's some data we know is like this leads to this. And it doesn't mean the clinician's doing a single thing wrong. It's just, hey, you might consider change, like suggesting to the client that they come on a weekly basis instead, and that we drop down once they've gotten to a certain number of sessions.
Exactly. Yeah, it's super useful. And like, this is where I love having the tangible data because it does draw out that like um, intangible stuff and makes it tangible. So maybe another example. So we had a clinician who has a high cancellation rate. A lot of their clients have ADHD and they see a lot of couples. And so they just have a really high cancellation rate. And so we say, okay, the expectation is you're doing 20 billable sessions per week, and we ask everybody for 25 openings, but you have a 30% cancellation rate where the practice average is 20% cancellation rate. It's like, actually, I think you should have 30 openings to be able to meet this number. And so there is that sort of coaching that we'll use with cancellation rates too, around how many available hours you need to actually meet the number based on your caseload. Um, and we
I
said
love
that,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's just
really
knowing the
helpful.
caseload and seeing that it's reflected in the data, and that
Mhm.
means that we need to do things differently in order to help them be successful. And
Mhm.
that's queuing them up for success rather than micromanaging or doing something, it's not about performance. It's just about helping them get to where they want to be and where you want them to be. So it's a win-win.
Exactly. Yeah. Can I give maybe one more example of how we've
Give
used
as
this sort of
many as you
information?
can,
Yeah.
please.
So this is an interesting one that honestly will be solved once we do the conversion rate situation. So FYI, set up conversion tracking. We're gonna do that next week. But we didn't have it set up, or we're gonna set it up soon. Anyway, we had a clinician who's been working for our practice since September. And like I said, usually we expect people to be full within 4 months, or by their fourth month, we expect them to be full. And he was averaging like 15 sessions a week or something. And so we were sending out this data, and we ended up getting to the point where we're like, okay, we like really need to address this. We had a new supervisor supervising him that we hadn't appropriately trained on how to talk to him about data. So we're also now working on a training process for our supervisors so that they know what an issue is and how to parse data and talk about it. Um, so he had this really low average sessions per week, but also like 0% churn rate and a normal cancellation rate for our practice. And so we were like, okay, this is interesting. And so we looked at his retention, which was 50%, but he only had like 2 new clients. And so again, that's like not a ton of data for that particular thing. So we said either this is that he's just not full, so his available hours are not filled up, and or he's not converting clients from consults. Like we're giving him consults and his schedule's not filling up. So in looking at like his cancellation rate, churn rate, and retention rate, we kind of landed on, oh yeah, he's got this like ongoing 5 openings in his calendar, and we are constantly giving him new clients, and he's not converting them to intakes. So this isn't us not filling his schedule. This is him not converting a potential client to an actual client. And so that led to some coaching around, and again, the conversion report is going to solve that problem for us where we don't have to think that hard about it. But we were able to sit with him and say, how are you ending a consultation? Like, what are you telling clients about what you do? How are you talking to them about scheduling at the end of the consultation? Are you leaving it up to them, or are you telling them you think it would be a good fit? Let's schedule. And we found out that he was really uncomfortable telling clients, I think this is a good fit. When would you like to schedule an intake? Which is what we coach all of our team on how to end a consult, is to say those two things. This is a great fit. Let's schedule the intake if it's a good fit, which it isn't always. And he said, I don't want to say that to my clients. That's not client led. That's me telling them what to do with their care and not being person centered. And we were like, whoa, 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 hold on. Actually, being person centered is being clear with your clients about what you're at and what their next steps are. And you're actually limiting their access to care by doing your consults like this. And so we were able to uncover like what the issue was for his conversion rate, and then why it was an issue for him. Like it wasn't that he's not assertive or doesn't know what to say. It's that he thinks it's an unethical thing to say. And we were able to talk him through, actually, no, it's the opposite of that. What you're doing is less ethical than what we're telling you to do. And so we were able to have a really good conversation with him about it. And we're still in the midst of like tracking whether this change is working or not. I think it is. But it was a really, really useful coaching conversation with him where we got to learn a lot about how he functions, and teach him something new about like administrative work that is like really, really connected to the clinical work.
That's amazing. I love, love that example. And I think it's just um, so relatable in all of our practices that you can see somebody has a different number for something. You try and figure out, is it this? Is it this? And then you find out there is a real reason that's different. Like he is the outlier in terms of what he or they is sharing on these calls, and it's making it so clients aren't feeling like and some of it is speculation, but again, you said we can look at the data later and see if it changes anything.
Yep.
And just having like a really open conversation around that. You're not telling them, you're just trying to understand where they're coming from, where they got that understanding from. Hey, why don't we try it this way and see if it changes anything? Here's kind of the data around it. It also, I think our Rebook blog post speaks to this exact issue. And if you haven't seen it, Tony, I would share it with clinician because it's all about like where this comes from. Sort of this like fear of being too, authoritative, I guess, or
Mhm.
something to our clients, and how that actually is um, harmful.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was a really good conversation with him. Oh, thanks for that link, Kevin. I'm going to share that with that clinician later today. Um, but it also, I think, maybe speaks to our general sort of stance around data that I think helps it land better with our team, is that we are super clear with them about like curiosity first always. That's one of our core values as a practice, that we enact in a lot of different places, but especially around data. We say like, okay, a number's just a number until it has a story, and only once it has a story is it really super meaningful to us to do something with. And I think our team receives that really well, that like we're never going to just interpret it without more information, and more of that sort of qualitative information that we gather from them, which has been, I think, useful for our team to be able to accept our use of data.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I want to just underscore, since you said it so well, is like we're going to track whether this intervention changed
Mhm.
something. So that's why we also need to be looking at data regularly, is when we make a change, whatever the change is in our practice, we want to see, is it working?
Yes.
Somebody just shared an example with me about how they just had a clinician where we saw that their retention rate dropped significantly. So again, we did some digging into like what has changed around that time. And they were like, oh, well, their availability became really limited. They started saying that they could only work from 10 to 3. Well, that didn't work for most of their clients. And so, um, that alone helps them to kind of say to the clinician, well, this isn't going to work for the practice to have this kind of um, these limited hours. It wasn't that those specific clients left, but they also couldn't get new clients to really make it work.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to see when the data changes for any reason, is there a story connected to that, to your point, um, that can also help us make another change?
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And that's where I think the like regular look at the data is really valuable, both from the practice's perspective and the clinician's perspective, that like we're looking at it at a minimum once a month. And then telling our team we're looking at it, here's what we found, and then we sit down and talk about it together. And so ideally, our clinicians are seeing it twice a month, and me, the supervisors, are seeing it 3 times a month. When we look at it, when we send something to the clinician, and then when we sit down and talk to the clinician about it. So really I think that is really helping, like building that into our systems is helping normalize the use of data, getting everybody really used to the conversations around it, getting people comfortable with it, and just having it be just a normal part of our operations and not just like a thing that's tracking over here that only I look at. It's like, no, this is meaningful for everybody. And so we're all going to look at it and we're going to look at it regularly. We're not just going to have it and not use it.
Yeah, the visibility is really key for the success of using data.
Yeah.
So I'll stop talking and I want to let people ask Toni questions that are kind of specific to Toni's use of data, things that she shared. And then if it's more of just a general practice vital question, we can field those in a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, just from the chat, it looks like we have a question from Dr. Melody. Do you use churn rates as a metric? And if so, what do you implement for those with higher churn rates?
Yes, we do use churn as data. Most of our clinicians have really low churn, which is great. But we sort of look at it really similar to how we look at things like retention. Is like, okay, over the last year, you've got a higher churn rate than we would expect. Let's like look at these clients that have churned and see if we can figure out a story. Is this something about how you're scheduling them? Is this that you're working with a lot of couples and they all got divorced and quit therapy? Or like what might be some of the reasoning here? So with churn similar to retention, we really try to look at what's the story behind this that we can then attach to some coaching conversations around what do we need to change? Is this about how you're scheduling people? Is this about your client base? Is this about like, wow, maybe you're the most effective therapist ever and your clients are feeling better after 3 sessions? Like maybe not, but like that's cool. If you like all these clients said they feel better. Or are your clients just ghosting you after X number of sessions? And like, what's happening there? Is that about how you're presenting yourself as competent or supportive or whatever? So again, lots of digging into why do we think this is happening? Let's brainstorm and then try to figure out a solution from there.
Yeah, I'm curious if there's anything you think your practice is doing well that contributes to that low churn rate, or if you have a sense of what that could be.
Oh, that's a good question. I want to ask that to my clinical director. Yeah, because churn is not one that we ever really feel concerned about. We see more when we do have concerns, it's usually about average sessions or retention.
Yeah.
Um, I think so. A lot of my practice, like we are a highly, highly, highly relational group of therapists. And so I think we hire and bring on therapists that do a really good job like building that initial relationship and building a treatment plan from the beginning that clients feel really bought into. I think our team has a lot of skill there. I think we're also generally pretty assertive about scheduling our clients, which gets them retained too. Um, so I think that's probably
Yeah.
what we're doing that's
I mean,
working.
all of that factors in, and I would say it also often comes down to the matching that's happening, the referrals you're giving to who. So some of that is on your intake coordinator.
Mhm.
And then, and that's where it's more, if it's kind of across the board in the team and there's a high churn rate, maybe it's more of a systems issue and a
Yeah,
practice-wide issue. And
yeah,
if you see that there's an outlier on a specific with a specific clinician, and let's say they have 40% churn, but most people have about 10%, then we can pretty much point to that clinician being, or something with the clinician. It could be like Toni was saying, where they just use a different script at the end of the session, or not script, but they're not booking the person again. So then
yeah.
we look at the other metrics to see, what else could be feeding into the churn rate? Is it that they're not rebooking people? Is it, that they are not really assertive about like the treatment plan or kind of giving people that idea of what's next?
Exactly.
So I think that's where it really helps to look at whether there's an outlier.
Yeah, yeah. I should add too, and I see a couple other questions in the chat, but that our intake coordinator does a lot of work. We do a lot of pre-work before a client goes to a consultation where we know that the insurance or billing situation will work for that client. We know that their schedule aligns with what our therapist has. We know what their presenting problems align with what our clinician likes to do. So we basically know like, okay, you're probably going to be Toni's 10 a.m. Monday client, and Toni has an opening on 10 a.m. Monday. We know that works for your thing. We know she takes your insurance. Now you just need to go meet Toni and see if you like her. And usually the answer is yes. And then the client sticks around, right? Because all the logistics really work. So I love, Tori, that you highlighted the intake coordinator's role in that the matching process is wildly important. Yeah.
Can I
So,
hop onto
well,
that? Because I'm
Mhm.
just curious. We don't have an intake coordinator. Our admins sort of play that role, generally speaking. But we have found that if we don't reply to that first initial inquiry, we try to call first. If we don't reach them, we send an email saying, hey, I think this person could fit for you. Here's some consult times.
Mhm.
We just want to give them a therapist. We want to give them times. And basically, there's a bit of information in the intake that we use to decide on who to match it. But I'm wondering if matching is one of our issues. And I'm curious how you do that intake because I worry about not giving them that dopamine hit of getting them booked, that the back and forth that can happen or waiting to schedule an intake call will mean that they've lost that motivation to just get it booked.
We have defaulted to gathering as much information as possible in our contact form. So we ask about scheduling preferences, insurance, upload your insurance card. Do you want in-person or virtual? Why are you seeking therapy? Have you been suicidal recently? Have you had a higher level of care recently? So we try to gather as like, what are your demographics? We try to gather as much of that data as possible so our intake coordinator can just look at that and then say, okay, we have two therapists that match everything. And then we
Yeah.
say, who do you want to book with? This person has 10 a.m. tomorrow. This person has. So we try to make it so she can send one email to schedule.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it is a back and forth because they didn't upload their card or whatever it is. There's more back and forth.
Yeah.
But we
That's so
try to gather a
interesting.
lot from the client when they reach out initially so that we don't have to ask a lot of follow-up questions.
Yeah. I need to consider that because our marketing people have always said lower the friction, like make it, we have literally like name, email, phone number, and then if they want to, it's an optional, tell us a little bit about what you're looking for. Because we saw like just people would drop off on that form if there was too much, but I'm hearing more people are doing this or even like a matching quiz or something like as something to start out with. But anyway, I just wanted to say I appreciate that feedback because I think we need to maybe do a little bit better with matching.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too of like, well, and maybe this is a side conversation, but I think it's really useful to ask, or at least for us, useful to ask a lot because then we are going to be able to not waste time on bad fits.
Yeah.
That like the people who are dropping off might be the people who aren't good fits, but if they fill it out and then you spend 2 hours, checking their insurance and doing all this stuff, and then oh, it turns out it doesn't work. If we see that their availability doesn't match anything we have, we just say, sorry, we don't have any openings. And our
Yeah,
admin coordinator can like move on to somebody else who can match with the therapist we have.
for sure.
So I think, yeah, in terms of like ROI on our intake coordinator's time, I think it's really valuable. There probably
Yeah.
are some clients that say this is too long and I don't want to. And how
But
motivated
I
are you
also
for
think like
therapy
when
if you
I'm
can't
seeing
spend
a
3 minutes
therapist,
filling out a form?
yeah, I mean, I would want that. I would want to be matched really intentionally and really well. I think a part of the assumption for us, because we see perinatal clients, it's often it's a mom, she's
Ah,
often postpartum. So it's kind of like everyone has that skill set, and so everyone could be a fit. So we kind of look at like who needs a client,
for
and
sure.
Anyway, I won't belabor it, but thanks, Tony.
Kelsey, Kelsey's had her hand raised.
Mhm.
I've got a couple questions for you. Or two questions. I first off wonder when you do notice retention is lower than you want it to be, do you, rather than, I've been doing the coaching side with the clinician, but do you do any follow-up with the clients who have not followed up, and how do you go about that? Or, I mean, you or anybody else
We
to
don't.
get it started? Okay.
We don't. And I think that that is probably a really smart idea to do in some way, shape, or form. Hey, we noticed that you stopped therapy after a few sessions. Do you have any feedback for us? A lot of times if clients like tell us that they're ending therapy, we'll offer a final session or ask for feedback or whatever. But some clients just kind of disappear and we close their file.
Mhm.
So it's like, how likely
Yeah.
are they to respond? I don't know. But I I think it could be useful to try to find that feedback if you can.
Yeah, we have an exit survey, and each clinician is just at their discretion to provide that when they've terminated. But I know some clinicians are more consistent about those things than others, and so I'm considering us doing that on the administrative side, regardless of rather than relying on the clinician to do that. And I think
Mm.
it's been more used when people are intentionally terminating rather than it being used when somebody ghosts or somebody leaves and you don't know exactly what the true reason behind it is. So it's just something I've been thinking about. And then the other question I had, I'm now blanking. Oh, it was about, I know you mentioned for you in particular, Tony, that conversion rate is something that you're more recently looking at intentionally, but so this would be kind of for anybody. I really appreciate on Practice Vital how there's these kind of national or general average at green, yellow, red, that's
Mhm.
info that just looking at the health of my own practice, it's cool to be able to compare it. And I
Yeah.
wonder if there is that for conversion or that for the number of inquiries that's kind of reasonable to have for X, like, a practice that's this big versus this big, because conversion rate from talking to someone to closing them as a client is something that I think I'm familiar with that conversion rate being talked about quite a bit, but I have no clue if the amount of inquiries we're getting are kind of normal or high or whatnot compared to other practices of our size. So I wonder if that's somewhere in Practice Vital or if any of you guys have insight on that or a place to find that.
Not within Practice Vital, because that would be more on the CRM side, I think, with
Yeah.
like how many leads are we getting, which we don't track. So, but I think it is interesting to think about for the conversion report specifically, like what is normal to convert from the consult call. And we don't have that. I mean, we have the data somewhere, but we haven't compiled any kind of thing in terms of industry standard around that. But if
Mhm.
anyone wants to share theirs in the chat from the conversion report, just as a small point of reference, I'm happy to share mine too in there. So that would be the conversion report and looking at the total practice view and seeing what the average conversion is. So,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and was mentioning to Christina in the chat too that we use Brexy for our CRM, but I've only been using it for a few months, and they've done so much to continue to improve it. And I don't think that, and we get to see our total inquiries, but we can't compare it to an industry standard. So that's the part that I have that data for my practice now, but I
Well,
wonder
and
what's
I think
normal.
the industry standard is going to really vary, right? Because it's like, how many clinicians do you have? How many openings do you expect? Like, what is their churn rate and retention rate? How often do you have openings? Like, I don't know that there would be a good industry standard for like, if we have this many clinicians, we need that X number of inquiries per month, because it's really going to be dependent on your team's rate of needing new clients and how many total openings you have. So I think you could probably back your way into that data, like how many inquiries do we need each month based on some of the other data you have for your
I
team. It
could
would not
look at
also
how
depend
many
on the,
inquiries we need, but I wonder what is like in terms of, I could see it more being comparative around the part of town that you live in. We're in a rural area versus
Mhm.
urban, some of those things
Yeah.
being big factors, but I'm wondering, how are people finding how effective their Google ads are, or things like that based on the numbers of people actually coming in. Is that industry standard or not?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it depends on how much you're spending on ads too, right? So I know a lot of group practice owners in my area, and we talk numbers because we find it really helpful. And I just spend a lot more than they do on ads, and I'm okay with the smaller profit margin just because I know that it's getting everyone busier and that's starting to pay off. But I think it would vary quite a bit.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
so I want to make sure we have time also if there are just general
Yeah.
questions,
See some
Practice
more
Vital
in the
specific.
see some more in the
Yeah,
chat too,
I
I
do
think.
have a quick question
Yeah.
regarding open notes and compliance. Like, is there a way, because of the volume of clinicians we have, about 200, that we want to be able to track weekly if there's some open notes that are putting us at risk around compliance so that we can, keep track of that?
Yeah, definitely. So on your practice dashboard, it will say key metrics, and then you can see overdue notes. And I can pull that up right now so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah, Martha, I replied to your chat
Okay,
question.
thank you.
We have these practice in vital kind of blogs too that, how can you, check note progression and things like that. So, but
Mhm.
Tori is showing you exactly where that
Yeah,
kind of
so
takes you.
on the practice dashboard, here's where your overdue notes are. And so if you want to look on, like you could look, this is any note that's overdue from the past 12 months, but I could look at just the notes from last week if I put those in here. So, um, just put out whatever dates it was. So from the 18th to the, what was it? Sorry, I'm looking at my other screen, 22nd, click apply. And then we can see, okay, 58 notes. And if I click the information bubble, click view appointments, that will bring you to all the notes that are late from last week that are still overdue. Does that answer it, Martha?
Yes, thank you.
Great. One thing I wanted to also just flag because Toni was talking about how when there's a new clinician, we don't always see their retention rate show up. So I don't know if anyone has a new clinician where they want me to use that person as a guinea pig. I'm happy to kind of view the data that way. Otherwise, I can just show you what generally you would do is if you come into the data sheets clients area and you select a clinician, um, here you can see it will show up as too recent to tell. And so that is the way to track basically early retention is do they have a next appointment? So I could do next appointment, none scheduled. And that way, even if it's too recent, so let's do retention by, retention total just means how many sessions that they had. So it would look a lot like this, where it would say too recent, but if I see, okay, April 30th, they had an appointment, they haven't come back since April 30th. They only had one session, and it's saying it's too recent, but there's no next appointment. So I still can track their retention on an early time frame. So I don't want to wait 90 days or 6 months before I start looking at somebody's patterns as a new hire. I want to come here every week with new hire in particular, and I'm tracking are all of their clients rebooked, all of the new people that they have, how frequently are those clients coming in, how often are they being scheduled? And so I'm really staying on top of that in particular for new hires.
Awesome.
Other questions from the chat or?
I'm always curious what range of the date range people are using when they're meeting with their teams because I feel like 6 months and a year can vary so much. I mean, even if you add an extra week, sometimes it's like, oh shit, that's so different. And so I'm curious, do you pull like the 6 month and the 12 month every time you do a quarterly check-in, or what do you use, Toni?
That's a great question. So for our monthly check-ins, we use quarterly data. So like it's the end of May now. So when we send the beginning of June, we will use Q1 data. And then at the end of once we have a full Q2, we'll start using Q2 data. And then what we typically do is like if a clinician's data based on a quarter feels weird, if I'm like, oh, their retention rate looks lower than I would expect for this person, then I'll pull year to date or past 12 months to capture a larger swath of data. And then if the data in that date range still feels like, oh, that's concerning, then that tells me, okay, this is more of a pattern than a weird quarter. And then we might address it and dig into it more. But if like it looks weird over the quarter, but fine over the course of the last 2 years, then I'd say, okay, maybe this quarter was weird. We might still dig into it to figure out what's going on there because it's still important. But we usually use the last quarter and then we'll expand if we feel like we need it.
Toni, I missed the first part, like the first 5 or 6 minutes of this. Can you explain how often, or just remind me, you were sending the reports to the clinicians?
Yeah, so we do it monthly. We send them an email each month with their average sessions a week, churn, cancellation rate, and retention rate. And in that email, we also remind them that they can log in on their own and look at it, and then we talk to them about it in a monthly meeting as well. Usually that just takes a couple minutes.
Do you send it like a lot earlier before your meeting, or is it all kind of in the same time frame?
It's like a first of the month sort of workflow for our clinical director. Yeah. And that's been super valuable, I think, just so that our clinicians have sort of regular touch points with their data and they know we're looking at it.
Other questions for Toni or generally?
Yeah, just circling back to Toni, how can we connect the client back to therapy notes if they don't have a number, a client number? How do we, if we're trying to have our office manager
Yeah.
or VA kind of contact that patient to get them back on the schedule?
We find it based on the data sheets, or Tori, you might know the name of this better, but we look at the data sheets and it tells you like this client was not retained. Here's the date and time of their intake session, and then you can get back into your EHR and find them that way of like who was this specifically.
Every EHR is a little bit different in
Yeah.
terms of how we connect the client. But yeah, the common way for everyone to be able to do is to see the date and time of the last appointment
Hmm.
and then have your EHR open and being able to just kind of find that client. Um, and otherwise, some of the EHRs, you can actually click on the date or time of the appointment. So when they were last seen, and then click view appointment in the EHR. Some of them have it, some don't. So if you don't, it's just because we're not able to do it that way with yours. So that's kind of the shortcut way, but you also can see their initials there. Um, so a few different ways around that.
Hmm.
We're also going to have some things that make all of that easier in the future, in terms of like more of a workflow perspective around it, around like how you can use the client's sheet for many different things. Um, so that will be to come.
What CRM do we use Therasas as our CRM, which I highly recommend if anybody wants a
Does
referral.
Therasas provide that conversion or I don't know what to call what I
Yeah,
was trying to
yeah.
explain, but that
Conversion rate,
that
yeah.
inquiry to consultation
Yeah.
rate?
Yeah, it does. It has so much data. We don't even use the full potential of the data that I actually have my admin people working on it right now to figure out how to use the data more in that system. But we love it. We
I
love it.
realize now that I'm sure Brexy has that then. I just haven't looked at that number and I don't have a way to compare it to an industry standard, but I'm sure that that data is in there. That's helpful.
Ours has like an attribution report too, where we can see where all the new inquiries are coming from if I've set up the tracking. So I have tracking links for our Psych Today profiles and our Google Business profile and all of our Google ads. So we can tell, how many of our inquiries are coming from these places. So we can really track ROI on stuff that costs money like Google ads.
Okay, so next meetup we have on in the events section. So if you look on the welcome page within Practice Vital, upcoming events is a way to link there. If it's not already posted, it is going to be June 18th. And we switched the time, so we're doing a Thursday instead of a Friday just for summer to try and get people who might take Fridays off, and trying a different time as well, just to try and get some more folks in who can't always make it. So sign up for that next one if you would like to join us. Um, and any final questions, Practice Vital related? We have a few more minutes if anyone has anything else. Thank you so much, Toni, for joining us. Toni, we want to also share Toni's information so that you can contact her if you would like to work with her kind of one-on-one about implementing any of this. She is a coach who uses Practice Vital. So if you ever want to work more like hands-on with somebody around um, the processes, the systems, the rolling out for your team, the cultural piece, any of that, Toni is a great option. So we will also share that in the follow-up email. We'll share Toni's information so you can reach out directly if you'd like to. But thanks for sharing a bit of your story with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon. If you have specific questions, you can always reach out to support at Practice Vital. And thanks for joining today, everybody.
Yay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.